Hello again. Welcome to another episode of Leading from Alignment with our good friend, coach and mentor, John Opalewski. And today, what an honor, John, to have our guest with us. Would you like to introduce our special guest today?
Yeah, certainly would. We have with us Hal Donaldson, the president and founder of Convoy of Hope, which, if you're
Mm.
not aware, is a global faith-based humanitarian organization that addresses the root causes of poverty and hunger through disaster response, children's feeding, women's empowerment. And I know I'm touching on just a few things, Hal, and community development initiatives. And Hal, we are so grateful to have you on the podcast with us today. We're honored. And
Yeah,
we just want to say welcome to you.
Well, thank you, John. Thank you, Jim, for the invitation. I've been looking forward to being with you.
right on.
Hal, tell us a little bit about how Convoy of Hope germinated in
Oh,
you and how it's just ballooned into this amazing organization.
no, thank you. I have to go all the way back to when I was 12, and my parents were hit by a drunken driver. My dad was killed instantly, and my mother was seriously injured and would suffer the rest of her life, quite frankly. Our family didn't have insurance. The man who hit them didn't have insurance, and so our family went on welfare, and we lived on food stamps and handouts. And as a teen, as a youth, it was really hard times. My mom was working two part-time jobs. We were receiving groceries from our local church. They would bring bags of groceries to our door,
Mm.
going to school with holes in our shoes and empty cupboards, and so you couldn't even take a sack lunch to school some days. So there were some hard times. And I thought, well, the
Mm.
best way to escape poverty was through education. And so I worked my way through college, earned several degrees. I landed a writing job. I have a journalism degree. Landed a writing job and in my 20s began writing books for people. And
Mm.
I was 29 years of age and I'd received a book writing project in Calcutta, India.
Mm.
And when I landed, my host said, well, we want you to interview Mother Teresa for our book. And so here I am at the age of
No
29 with a
pressure.
one-on-one interview, yeah, with Mother Teresa.
Mm.
And in the course of the interview, she asked me a probing question. She said, young man, what are you doing to help the poor and the suffering?
Mm.
And I figured, well, I better not lie to her. I need to tell her the truth, right? And I told her, I said, well, I'm not doing much of anything. And
Mm.
she said, well, everyone can do something. Just do the next kind thing that God puts in front of you. Well, those words were really haunting for me. Um, I went back to the States and I was praying one day and I just felt compelled to do something quite unusual, to travel to 8 cities and to live in the streets for 3 days and 3 nights. So I
Mm.
went to Miami, Atlanta, Chicago, DC, New York, major cities. I rode with the police on the midnight shift. I walked the streets with a hidden tape recorder, interviewing drug addicts and gang members, prostitutes, runaways, and the homeless. And all I can tell you is that God got a hold of my heart in the streets of America. And I like to say it this way, that he had to do a work in my heart before he could do a work through my hands.
Mm.
And
Mm.
after those trips, came back 31 years ago and loaded up $300 worth of groceries in a pickup truck and started passing them out to working poor families. And that was the start of Convoy of Hope. And God breathed on it. And today it's the 27th largest charity in the United States out of
Wow.
1.8 million. But it started with a pickup truck 30 years ago.
Yeah.
I love that story. I, I mean, I don't love what led up to that story. All of the heartache and pain,
Yeah.
uh, but how God took your pain and made something beautiful and life-giving out of it is never get tired of hearing that story. God is an absolute genius that way, how
Yeah,
he pulls those things together. Hal, tell
yeah.
us a little bit about what's going on in Jamaica. This will be dropping in December, so it'll be a little bit of time gap
Yeah,
in
yeah,
between the time of the event actually happened and the time this goes live. But can you catch us up a little bit on that?
yeah. And it's not just Jamaica, it's also Cuba, Haiti, and the Caribbean as a whole. And
Okay.
yeah, I think what happens on disasters like Jamaica, Hurricane Melissa, is that it's front page news or lead stories for a day or two, but
Right.
then it
Mm.
begins to become buried in other news. And
Right.
so people are not seeing it on CNN anymore. And it's, out of sight, out of mind. And so what happens is that you have NGOs and relief organizations that they will rush to a crisis, but when they can no longer raise dollars off of that crisis or for that
Right.
crisis,
Mm,
they'll leave. And
okay.
so at Convoy, we've kind of taken this approach is that we want to be one of the first on the ground and one of the last to leave. Last year, we responded to 99 disasters. There's probably a half dozen of those disasters that will be there for a couple years. It's because that's the need, and we feel like we've been called to really elevate the name of Jesus, but also elevate the local church. And if the church is still willing to do the work, then we want to make sure we're resourcing them. So what's happening in Jamaica right now is every day there are lines of people and sometimes vehicles and people are receiving bags of groceries. They're also receiving clean drinking water, and they're
Right.
also
Mm,
receiving ice. And
Mm.
sometimes when power goes out, what happens is that people don't realize that there's no place for them to keep their medicine. And so
mm,
ice is really critical. And so it's those three components that yeah, we respond very quickly. Um, we knew Hurricane Melissa was coming, and so we were prepared, and
yeah.
we're on the ground very quickly, meeting needs, and that will continue for as long as it needs to happen, and then we'll transition into mud outs and helping homes get rebuilt. We've already identified like 40 churches that have been either destroyed or heavily damaged, and so that's probably a component in the months ahead as well.
And so Hal, if somebody's listening or watching this today to this podcast, what's the best way for them to reach out to Convoy if they want to help in any way, shape, or form?
Yeah, when people ask that question, John, I appreciate that question. I encourage them to give through their local church whenever they can. I
Okay.
think there's really pluses in that. But if their church is maybe it's not a part of Convoy's network, which is a large network, thousands of churches. But if they're not a part of it, they can go to convoyofhope.org and designate it for Jamaica, Cuba, Haiti, whatever, and we'll make sure that people get help.
Awesome. Jim, did you have any questions around the just this introductory part for Hal?
No, I think the one thing that I have though is I love that Convoy of Hope was $300 of groceries in a pickup truck.
Yeah.
Mm,
And I think
yeah.
as a dreamer and someone who loves dreamers, I love that you ran towards something that most reasonable people ran from. And you brought the best that you had to it, and then God added to it and added to it and added to it. Now it's a fleet of semis, and
Yeah.
everything else that comes with it. It was a pickup truck. Was the pickup truck red
Yeah.
by any chance? Because that's kind of the
No.
convoy
No,
colors.
it was
Yeah,
white. It was white pickup truck. But hey, if I could just comment on that, Jim, real quick.
yeah,
For me, vision has always been incremental.
yeah,
God has not
Mm,
shown me like the final destination, and I'm glad He didn't. It would have
yeah,
freaked me out, right? And so I'm
yeah.
glad it's
yeah,
incremental. And
yeah,
He's just even to this day, He shows us the next step, and you're
yeah.
obedient to that step, and then He'll show you the next one and the next
Right.
one. And that's how this has been a 30+ year journey of just trying to be obedient to the next step. But I
Yeah,
think there's a crossover to our own lives and our own businesses, even and our own churches. Just be
yeah.
obedient and watch what God does.
The next thing. Yeah, I love it. I love it.
So good. So Al, it was probably 6, 7 months ago, I stumbled across one of your books
Hmm.
called, the title is What Really Matters, How to Care for Yourself and I love the subtitle, and Serve a Hurting World.
Mm.
And so much of Converge Coaching's ministry has to do with helping people that are busy leaders, sometimes way too busy,
Mhm.
and they get into trouble. And so this book, when I saw the title, I said, "Oh, I have to pick this book up."
Mm.
And I was telling you and Jim before we started recording that I rarely finish an entire book. I usually get to about page 100, 120, and I've kind of had it. Full disclosure, but this book was so compelling, I just couldn't put it down. I read through the
Well,
whole
thank you.
book.
Thank you very
And if it
much.
would be all right with you, we would love to spend the rest of our time together talking, asking you questions about some of the things in this book that just popped out at us and resonated with us so deeply. And if that's all right with you, we'd just like to
Oh,
jump
thank you
into
so
that right
much.
now.
Oh, I'm thrilled. I appreciate the invitation very much.
So, Hal, your book opens with, I think, a counterintuitive idea that success can be more dangerous than failure,
Mhm.
especially in ministry and in service.
Mhm.
And I wondered if you could share a moment in your journey where you discovered that truth firsthand, and then how did it change the way you lead and the way you serve?
Mhm. Yeah. Well, I wrote the book. Maybe start there if you don't mind. I'll start there and then come
That's
back to the
fine.
question.
Yeah.
Um, Served as a baseline. Um, because of Convoy of Hope's meteoric growth, we're feeding 639,000 children a day, and 61,000 mothers and girls are being trained every year, and tens of thousands of farmers, and 120 outreaches across the United States. So it's grown exponentially. And I was receiving a lot of phone calls wanting to know, how are you climbing up the Forbes list so quickly?
Mm,
What's the organizational adjustment you need to make? And I would say something like, well, it begins with the heart, begins with the heart of the leader. And if the heart of the leader is strong, if it's healthy, then you're giving God a foundation that he can build upon. But if the heart of the leader is flawed, God can only build so tall. And
mm.
people would kind of chuckle and they would say, yeah, yeah, I get that, but what are the organizational adjustments? And
Right.
I said, no, it really comes back to the heart. And so
Yeah.
finally I just said, I'm just going to put it in writing. And so now when people call, I just send them a book. And it's kind of saved a lot of time, quite frankly. But but coming back to your question, yeah, what happened with me is that when you experience a certain level of success in the world's eyes, not necessarily God's, but in the world's, um, what comes with that is higher expectations.
Yeah.
And people expect you to live up to a certain image. That's certainly where I was in my 40s and probably my early 50s, is I was a slave to other people's expectations. And so
Mm,
when I talk about the fact that success is more dangerous than failure, that's what I mean, is that with success come more expectations. And, for me, it came to a head. I'll share two stories. One is that I was in Afghanistan and I was helping children, I was feeding kids after the war. And here I am on a satellite phone in the middle of nowhere, and my wife is telling me that my daughter just broke her arm. Um,
mm,
and I'm not there to care for
Right.
her. I'm caring for a lot of other kids, but I'm not there to care for her. A short time after that, I found myself in the hospital with a heart condition, and it was while I was in the hospital that God really got a hold of me and said, "You're trying to do too much.
Mm.
You're
mm.
making sacrifices I'm not asking you to make." And
Yeah.
yeah, so that was the eye opener. And how that changed was that I became very intentional in how I was living my life, and I made some drastic changes.
Was that difficult, that shift for you, Hal? Did it take you a while to figure out how to work
Yeah,
differently?
yeah, yeah, it did because if you are a leader, you want to please those who are following you.
Yeah.
But your followers sometimes are adding to the expectations.
Mm,
And I had to get to the point, John and Jim, where I was willing to disappoint some people
Mm.
who wanted me to do this and do that, but I knew I had to disappoint them. And I had to get to that point. And just again, being frank with you, I came to the realization it was more important to not disappoint my children and my wife
there
than
you
it
go.
was to disappoint other people.
Mm.
And when I came to that realization, some things began to change.
Yeah.
I, one of the major themes of your book, Hal, comes up with just caring for yourself. And I think
Yeah.
there's that thought, self-care is selfish. I I got here because I was serving everybody and doing everything. But I think we've all lived long enough to people that serve too hard, too long, lost their
Yeah,
health, lost their mental
yeah,
health, lost their family. You talk about three rhythms in your book, how you discovered those things. That person help you stay mentally, physically, and spiritually healthy. Can you unpack a little bit of that for us?
yeah, yeah. I think, Jim, you have to be intentional. And, I think are many people who mean well, but they're not intentional. And I'll
Mm,
just tell you maybe three things that I had to put in place that
yeah,
affected me physically, spiritually, and mentally, emotionally.
yeah,
And they're practical. Now, this book, if you've read it, you know it's very practical,
It is. Amazing
scriptural,
book.
but very practical, right?
sure, yeah,
And so I'll just give you three things that I did coming out of the hospital. One is that I put into place an 8 p.m. rule. Now,
okay,
the 8 p.m. rule is that after 8 o'clock, I'm not going to deal with anything that's
mm,
significant, nothing major.
right,
Because here's why, is if you're thinking about it at 8, you may be thinking about it at midnight and 2
yeah,
in the morning. And what you're doing is you're
yeah,
stealing from tomorrow.
yeah,
And so,
mhm,
I put into place an 8 p.m. rule. Second thing I did was I stopped taking dinner meetings.
mm,
Even to this day, when people come to town and want to go to dinner, I say no,
mm,
respectfully. I
yeah,
said, I'm more than willing to do lunch or breakfast, but dinner is my wife's time, it's my family's time,
good,
it's God's time. And
yeah,
so that was the second thing I did. Here's the third practical step. I made vacations sacred. There
hmm,
was I made them sacred. At the beginning of the year, we took out a 12-month calendar and we mapped out our vacation time. And
interesting,
my daughters knew, my wife knew that during that period of time, I was theirs. And there was
yeah,
nothing that was going to get in the way of that.
right,
During one of those vacations, I was invited to the Oval Office with five other leaders. And
yeah,
I turned the President of the United States down.
Wow.
Why? Because I'd made a commitment to my daughters and to my
I
wife, and
love,
I've lived by that
I
for
love
many
it,
years. But that's the kind of practical steps that we have to take. We have to be intentional.
yeah,
And
Yeah.
once you're intentional, then I think you really move back into God's blessing. I like to describe it this way. I think there's a flow from heaven. And when you're directly underneath God's spigot, you're drenched in his favor.
hmm,
When you're working too hard and you're too busy and you're not giving the family the attention it deserves, you're outside of that flow. And I think what I did
Mm.
intentionally took some steps that got me back into the flow of God's favor.
It's interesting, Hal, how it almost sounds like you were doing less with Convoy of Hope, but it doesn't appear that God has removed his blessing on the organization. In fact, it seems like the organization has flourished. And it's amazing to me. I think about Sabbath as an example. It that we can actually accomplish more when we Sabbath well than when we
Yes,
don't. And God's
yes,
math is different than our math. It logically doesn't make sense, but in God's
yes,
economy, it makes a ton of sense. And so I love that. Uh, I can't imagine being I run a small organization. I can't imagine running an organization of the magnitude that you do. But to hear you say that I actually felt like I was under God's blessing when I made those decisions is I think that's something every leader who's listening today needs to
mm,
consider and
yes.
and explore because it's just such a powerful thought. I've never heard it put that way before,
yeah,
and so yeah, really amazing. In the book,
Thank you.
you spend time really pulling back the curtain on the behind the scenes of building Convoy of Hope, and you've already mentioned the cost to your family and to your own health. Um,
Yes,
I want to go a little off the reservation here, and if And if you're not comfortable with it, just say, John, I'm not comfortable with it.
No problem.
Because Hal, I think that when it comes to how do we care for ourselves while we're serving a hurting world, the problem isn't always system problem. It's not always a system problem. Many times it's a system problem plus what we call a DNA problem or an internal
Mm.
something that's kind of broken, maybe on the inside of us that drives us without us knowing it's driving us.
Yeah.
Can you speak to that at all? Like, some of the deeper things that may fuel workaholism, may fuel this unsatisfiable drive to achieve.
Yes. I think it begins at an early age where we begin to
Mm.
aspire um, to um, to pedestals, and
Yeah,
we put on pedestals the people who have the loudest voices, who have the largest networks, who are seen by the most people. And this is one of the things that God did to me when He got a hold of my heart, is that rather than idolizing the people who had the loudest voices, maybe what you need to do is idolize the people who have the most faith, who are the most kind, who are the most prayerful. And so I think, John, I think it goes all the way back to what are you going to idolize and what are you trying to emulate? What are you trying to aspire to? And if you're going to become more like Jesus, then it's not about recognition, it's really about service. It's about being a prayerful person, it's about being loyal, it's about being kind. And I think that's, for me anyway, I think that's where it started when you're watching Christian celebrities on television, and you're trying to aspire to that. And I'll come back to what I said before. When I got my heart in a better place, when my heart became healthy, that's when God began to bless. And
yeah,
so for me, I think I've never probably said it this way, but I think I was chasing need rather than chasing obedience. I was
Mm.
chasing
wow.
the need of the poor, the suffering all over the world,
Mm.
but not necessarily being obedient. I can't tell you, being in Afghanistan, when my daughter breaks her arm, that I was living in obedience. I was responding to a need. And I'll come back to the life of Jesus. Jesus was surrounded by the poor, but the hungry, the hurting, people who needed healing, but he didn't feed everyone. He didn't heal everyone. He did what his Father asked him to do. And that's
Yeah,
why we need a prayer life that's commensurate with the compassion ministry that God's called us to.
yeah. And sometimes I think his father called him away from all of that
That's
to
right.
be alone,
That's right.
so he
That's
can
exactly right.
refuel. I know in my own life, I think that there were messages early on as a kid that I heard from people that I loved and respected that created this wound in me that I was not aware of until I hit a wall. I went to a counselor because I had hit a wall of depression, major depression, and to find out how that my workaholism, a good deal of my workaholism was trying to prove those early messages in childhood
Yeah.
wrong.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes. Amen.
Uh, and when the counselor was able to bring that to the surface, it was like one of those beautiful aha, crying for 30 minutes
Yeah.
revelations that you got to be kidding me. I've been letting that drive me. And so when we're helping pastors and leaders who are over busy, we're looking for system issues, but we're also looking for what's going on the inside of you
Right.
that's
Yes.
driving you
Yes.
to this.
So
Right. Trying to get
true.
that blessing you couldn't get when you were a kid or
Yeah.
whenever, right? I'm just trying to find identity through what I do rather than whose I am, and then from that doing those things. Yeah. Along those same lines, how your book talks about there's a tension, right, between self-care and selfishness. And again, your platform is very visible. The ministry is well known. And that's in your dynamic. And some of our pastors that are listening to this, they're dynamic. They're in a small town somewhere. They're as known per capita and their community as you are in a global community. And there's that thought of, if I go play golf, what are people going to think? If I take my wife
Yeah.
on a date, if I say, I'm sorry, I have an appointment, I can't meet with you, and then they catch me out at my kid's little league game, but I said appointment, not little league game, so they wouldn't argue with me about
You're right.
how their need was more
Right.
important than my son's need. How do how do
Right.
you how do you wrestle with the tension of that? How do you decide what's self-care, what's selfishness, and when to tell people, I'm sorry I disappointed you, but I don't do dinner dates anymore? But
Yeah.
how do you do that?
Yeah, well, at first we have to understand that it's not selfishness. It's actually being selfless, because when our tank is full, we have a lot more to give away.
Yeah.
Mm.
And so I think that. And the second thing would be, we have to believe that God can accomplish more in 70 seconds than we
Yeah.
can in 70-hour work weeks.
Yeah.
Mm.
If we really believe that, then
That's so
if
good.
we really believe that,
That's so
then
good.
it will change the way that we certainly operate. But
Yeah.
yeah, one of the things I do, just as a reminder that Convoy of Hope is completely reliant on the Lord. This is still a faith walk.
Yeah.
There's a lot more zeros, um, a lot more attention for sure, but it's still a faith walk. And I like to write down my prayer requests on little post-its or slips of paper, and I stick them in my wallet. Um, and so I sometimes I have a pretty thick wallet because I have a lot of prayer needs. But
Mm.
but anyway, I think for me that's just it's symbolic, but it also is a reminder that we are completely reliant on the Lord. It
Yeah.
belongs to Him. It's His mission. It's not ours.
Mm.
We're managers. We're not owners.
Right.
And yeah, I think we need to learn to pray more and work less.
Yeah.
Mm.
The thought that came to me as you were unpacking that, Hal, is this idea that our calling, what God has asked us to do, really wasn't our idea. It was
Yeah.
His.
Amen.
Um, it's His baby, not ours. And whatever happens, as long as we're good and faithful, as we do what He's asking us to do and we do it to the best of our ability, the outcomes are in His hand. And
That's right.
whatever the outcomes are, good or bad, He has our best interests in mind. And
Mm.
and when I
Amen.
can live out of that, I feel so much less stress.
Amen.
That
Amen.
God, this thing is not mine, it's yours. I have a role to play. But that's kind of what I hear you saying there. I'm just putting a little different spin on it. Go ahead, Jim.
No, it's perfect.
Yeah, yeah. Just a follow-up question for you, Hal. I'm not much for math, but if 30 years ago Convoy started, if I'm doing my math right, you were 30 years younger then, and you're 30
Yes.
years older now. So capacity
Yes.
to some degree has
Yes.
changed, right? And you talk
Yes.
about
For sure.
hospital and heart and stuff. What your ability for self-care, do you find you need more of it as you've gotten older or less of it, or is it just different as you get older? I'm 60. I just turned 60 this year, so I'm in my midlife crisis right now because I'm gonna live to at least
Yeah.
120.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts? Has it changed through the years for you?
I kind of feel it. Maybe it has, and I'm kidding myself. So I just confess that. Um,
Self-denial.
right, exactly. I kind of feel like I run at a fast pace, but an obedience pace,
Yeah,
and I think once you're living in obedience, it's not about having a balanced life. It's just having an obedient life.
gotcha. Okay.
And I think
Mm.
not trying to be braggadocious, but I think my prayer life has reached the point where I do more of what God wants me to do than I do what I want to do.
Right.
And
Mm.
I and my wife is a great barometer too.
Mm.
She'll say things like, "Hey, you've run really hard." She told me this last night. You've
Yeah.
run pretty hard the last 3 weeks. Why don't you just shut it down for a night and we'll do something fun. And so I think those
Mm.
things happen. But I see that I'm kind of running toward the finish line. And
Mm.
when I hit the finish line, I'll pass the baton off to someone else.
Yeah.
Um, I but I just try to be obedient, Jim. It's
Right.
really
Okay.
it's less
So
time management and more just obedience.
right. So there's not a methodology other than obedience. I
That's what I
I do
believe.
what the Lord tells me to do. And in the end, if that's a 70-hour work week this week, and a 40-hour work week next week, as long as I'm obedient, that's what matters.
That's what
And
matters.
sometimes the Lord's voice sounds a lot like my wife, only a little angry. That's my statement. Yeah.
I love that. That's good. That's good. You know, God is
Yeah.
so merciful. I think a lot of times we live in shame and we just we feel guilty all the time. And I used to imagine a God in heaven who had a pencil in his hand and he had this massive report card.
Right.
And when I failed, he'd give me like a D minus, Hal Donaldson D minus.
Yeah.
But the longer I've been at this, the more I realize he's so merciful. He's so full of
Mm.
grace. He doesn't have a pencil in his hand. He has an eraser in his hand. He erases our
I
mistakes,
love that.
right?
That's so good.
And
Oh,
it's
I just got
helped
my Easter
me.
message. I just got my
Great, there
Easter
you
message.
go.
Thank you.
There
Yeah.
you go. Yeah,
Yeah.
I really believe that he is so merciful when we make mistakes, when we overwork, when we overdo it. He forgives us and he just says, do
Yeah.
better next time. And
Yeah.
I have a word at Convoy of Hope. At Convoy, we do not fail. We do not fail. We learn. We just learn
Right.
from it.
Mm.
Yeah.
That's
And
so
that's helped
good.
us kind of press on.
Hal, I used to, when I started my journey toward whole person healing, 32 years ago,
Mm,
um, I was of the mind early on that I could find that perfect middle ground and live there. And once I lived there, then I wouldn't have to work at all of this
mm, mm.
staying well. And and I did experience, I like football, so I'll call it the 50-yard line.
Yeah.
Right
Yeah.
dead
Oh,
set
yeah.
in the middle. And in between laziness and workaholism, I was on the 50-yard line. It was a beautiful 60 seconds.
I
Uh,
like that. I like that. That's good.
but what I've discovered is that there is this tension, and I think health isn't being on the 50-yard line. I think it's living between the 35s.
Mm.
It's
And
good. I love
there are
that.
those seasons where we push and we're going towards the workaholism end zone, and then the Lord course corrects us, or our wife course corrects us, and says, "Hey, you're pushing too hard. You need to get back towards center."
Yes.
And then
Yes.
I can go the other route too, sometimes where I get a little lazy and I need the nudging of the spirit and I need the nudging of my team sometimes. Say, John, you need to get engaged in the game again. And I think for me, that's been an easier thing to get my arms around, that God is not expecting me to live dead center. I think that's heaven, probably, right? Heaven will be like
That's right.
that.
Yes.
Um, but I think I think the obedience piece is really important, because Jesus said, I only say what I hear my Father saying, and I only do what I see my Father doing. And I think that's a great recipe for being healthy and still
Yes.
helping and serving a hurting world.
It's so true. Yeah. I like how you said that. That's really powerful. I do. And I think a lot of times especially pastors, leaders, business leaders, it's so easy to just feel like, well, my success depends upon my work ethic. And I would just suggest that our success depends on our prayer ethic. Are
Mm.
we willing to really pray ourselves to success? Without it, we become self-reliant. We become full of ourselves. And
Yeah,
if you become full of yourself, you're not going to hear God's voice. You're
Mm.
just not.
yeah,
And all of a sudden now it all is dependent on us. It's not dependent on him.
right. Jim, we got one more question for him. We're starting to butt up here against time a
Yeah.
little bit.
I
Why
guess
don't you go ahead and ask it?
the book has so much wisdom in it. It almost leaves the impression, like I said, it's very practical, but 10 practical things is a lot. So
Yeah.
I'm going to come back like and say, of all the commandments in your book, which is the greatest
Mm,
one? Like what,
yeah.
if I were going to make a life change towards what you've laid out in the book, where should I start? Where should people that are listening right now get the book, read it, but then where would you begin to really find that, which we're talking about?
Yeah, it's not in the book, but I'll tell you where I'd start.
Okay.
If you are a pastor, business owner, even if you're on staff at a church or a business and you can get by with it, I would leave work at 3 o'clock every day.
Mm.
On this
Mm.
podcast, we're giving everybody permission to leave at
Yeah.
3 o'clock. All right.
Amen.
And
Yeah.
okay.
We agree.
And go for a week, and you go and you spend time alone with God and alone with yourself. And you make sure you sit down at the dinner table with your wife and your family
Yeah.
and implement the 8 p.m. rule. Don't
Yeah.
don't be texting and emailing at 10 o'clock at night. If you do that, I think what's going to happen is you're going to find that you're resetting your day-to-day activities. You're going to feel so much healthier.
Yeah.
And on top of things, it's going to change your mindset. And that will lead to other things you can do that are in the book.
I would call you, and I know you're a humble man, but a global leader in the sense that your ministry is finding the most hurting, suffering, devastated people on the planet, showing up and help. In other words, you're, people are running towards how do I excel? You're running towards those who've been just faced disaster after disaster. The fact that you are sane tells me that what you're saying is true.
Yeah.
And the fact that it, you're you wrote a book on emotional health. I think people should listen to this because my life is hard, or you have to deal with people with troubled marriages, or trust me, no one is dealing with the magnitude of suffering that you deal with on a day-to-day basis. And you're
Yeah.
telling me to go home at 3 o'clock and spend time
Yeah.
with God, be present with my family, turn the phone off and my mind off at 8 o'clock, get a good night's sleep, or I'm robbing the next day. I'm just so grateful for the time that you've given us, Hal.
Thank you, Jim.
I
Thank
think
you.
I could have said the same thing. It just wouldn't carry the weight. If I read your
Right.
book and just preached it like it was my sermon, it's one thing to say I care for the poor. It's another thing to have Mother Teresa say I care for the poor. And I don't mean to make you
Mm.
Mother Teresa. You look terrible in a dress,
Oh, thank you.
but
Thank you.
you're the one that I know. You're the Mother Teresa that I know, and you told me that I needed to take
Thank you.
better care of myself and my family, so that in the long run I can take better care of God's people. So
Amen. Yeah.
that's
This,
wonderful.
thank you. That's very kind of you. And, I hearken back to the 70-second rule. God can accomplish more in 70
Yeah,
seconds than we can in 70-hour work weeks.
100%. That's so true.
yeah,
It's humbling, isn't it, to realize that God could do all of this by himself if he wanted to.
Hmm.
And he's invited
Yes.
us to join
yeah,
with him. It's a father-son project that you're on, that we're on, and it really is amazing. So uh, I wanted to give our watchers and listeners a program note. This podcast will drop, and it will be the last podcast of the year for us. And we're going to give our team a break, the weeks of Christmas and New Year's, and we'll start dropping pods again on January 6th. So if you are looking for our podcast the week of Christmas, the week of New Year's, it's not there. You can find the old ones, but there won't be any new ones until
yeah,
the first Tuesday in January. So Hal, Jim's going to wrap us up, but
yeah.
I want to thank you again for your kindness, your generosity, and your
Seriously,
time with us,
yeah,
and your heart and your honesty with us. I truly believe this will impact thousands of leaders who listen and watch to this podcast in a indelible way. So thank you
yeah,
from the bottom
Thank
of
you,
my
John. Thank
heart.
you, Jim. Thank
yeah.
you, John and
And
Jim. You guys are amazing.
And
Grateful for
because
you.
this is airing just before Christmas, if you're looking for that last minute stocking stuffer, they're going to find your book, at least in a digital form right now. Where would they find that? How is that everywhere? Is that Amazon and Apple
Amazon,
Books?
Barnes and
And
Noble. Yeah.
right on.
Yeah, it
And
is.
I'd say it's a great gift because most people have time off between Christmas and New Year, and a lot of people want to focus on the next year. So if you got a friend, a spouse, a family member that is really, they're not at their best because they're not pacing themselves as we talked about today. What a great gift! Give them some time, give them a cup of coffee, send them out in the backyard if you live in the South. Put them in the family room if they live up north where we live,
Mm.
and let them read. And I think it would help frame 2026 in a better way. So God bless you, our watchers, our listeners. Hal, John, thank you so much. It's been gold, and we do appreciate it. And if you are out there saying, "What do I do next?" Buy a book or convergecoach.com/ press the button, and we will be there to help you think these things through as well. That's what we do, and we're glad to do it on a daily basis. So God bless you in this. We'll see you next year as you continue to lead from alignment.